Hello and welcome to the Low Carb Conversations podcast. I am your host, Holly Jean. I'm joined with my co-host, Leah, this morning. Hello, Leah.
Hi, Holly. Hi, everyone.
And I guess it's not morning for Leah, but it is for me. And we also have Vanessa Spina with us. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you both.
Yeah, this is so fun. We are coordinating all across the world today with Leah in Australia. I'm here in the US and you're in Prague, right, Vanessa?
Yes, and I applaud you both for doing a podcast around the world because I just can't imagine what it's like scheduling all the time with guests. But yeah, it's great to be here with you both.
Thanks. Yeah, it's so great to have you. Yeah, scheduling is fun, but it is so neat that we could be connected.
It is
with Zoom these days. I know there's a love-hate relationship with Zoom, but here we are. So Vanessa, you are a sports nutrition specialist. You have a best-selling book, the author of the Keto Essentials. You are an international speaker. You travel all over doing keynotes and events, just sharing about your knowledge and experience with keto. And you also have a very popular podcast, the Fast Keto podcast. And you're currently in school. Is that correct?
I finished my program. It's been a couple of years now. I went back to school to study biomedical science and biochemistry. And it was really amazing to go back and study it from the perspective of understanding keto. So that was, really, really incredible.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that. So you started the Ketogenic Girl in 2015, and then you were a guest on the show in 2017. And then here we are. I would love to hear like what's been going on with you just in like the last few years, how your business has changed, your practice has changed, and what's going on in the world of keto.
Yeah, thank you. Well, a lot has changed actually. The podcast that I do, which I've been doing, I guess I'm in the 5th year now. Fast Keto is now the Optimal Protein podcast. And that started to shift in the summer when I was about to give birth. I started doing this protein series, and the popularity of it, I had been focusing on protein content for a long time, my high protein experiment. And I guess, gave it a new name, and it really took things to the next level in terms of not just the audience size, but also the feedback that I was getting from people in terms of like, this is actually working for me. I'm seeing results. I'm getting changes. I'm breaking through stalls. And so I just kept following that feedback that I was getting from the community. And the community, I think, has been growing and evolving. We've all been growing and evolving together. So that's been really, really exciting. I gave birth this summer to my son, Luca, who's now 7.5 months. And that's been the most incredible thing I've ever experienced, and just such an incredibly rewarding and just amazing thing to have a little baby boy and to be a parent. And I also gave birth to something else, which is the Tone device, which is a new breath ketone analyzer that I launched in December. And I had been working on that for a few years. So it was really exciting to sort of have 2 babies in the past year. So lots been happening. And it's amazing. The last time I was on the podcast was 2017. That's right, when I wrote the first book. And lots has been happening since then.
Yeah. I'm really curious about this device because I know like ketone measuring that has come so far, like since really like the big keto craze kind of hit several years ago. And it used to be that the most accurate measuring was to do blood testing because like the breath stuff just wasn't as accurate as some people would prefer. Can you tell me how that technology has evolved?
Yes, it's definitely been evolving. The sensors have been evolving. The sensor that we use is like top of the line. And, in terms of the accuracy, I think one of the things that was missing with devices in the past was like, not just the accuracy, but also the portability, and then understanding and measuring what you're seeing in terms of the results. And one of the things that's really absolutely amazing about it is because we were so limited with the ketone testing strips, we're limited in terms of like cost, they're expensive. It's not fun to, puncture your flush every time just to see what your ketones are doing. But we were very limited in terms of how much data we could get, because at the most you would maybe test yourself, once a week, once a day, if you were able to, afford to test on that level. But with the tone, you can test an unlimited amount of time. So now we're getting feedback and we're learning all these new things about what our bodies do. And it seems like from the feedback we're getting, I'm actually working on a study to put all of this data together and publish it so that we can have greater understandings in terms of what's happening on the ketones and our bioenergetics. But when you measure your blood, you're getting a picture of the amount of one ketone form, beta hydroxybutyrate, that's been made by your liver, and then how much is circulating, but we don't know how much you've used. And so with this, you have, urine test strip testing, but that stops working because your body stops. When you're testing the urine, you're testing acetoacetate, which is wasted ketones. But with the breath, you're actually able to get this other picture, which is also utilization, because we sort of diffuse this other ketone called acetone through our lungs as we are burning fat. So acetone becomes a biomarker for fat burning or lipid oxidation. We're able to get this other picture, but we're also able to get more of a moving picture, because you're able to test in the morning, after meals, before and after exercise. Some people will wake up in the middle of the night and they'll test their ketones and they're like, wow, like what is happening in the night? Because we know we burn a lot of fat in the night. So I see people get crazy high numbers in the middle of the night. It's really fascinating. And I don't think ever before have we been able to test this often and in this great numbers. So I'm so excited about the data and the new understandings that are going to come from being able to test in this different way.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And I think like that's really neat to say, like it's just the breath, and you can like see all those different intervals of when you can test. And I know like the CGMs have been really popular lately too. And it's like it's really great to see that data of how your blood glucose is responding to things, but that doesn't tell you anything about whether or not you're actually in ketosis. So
Right.
that's pretty cool. I love how kind of this little industry has evolved from well, I know some people are still calling it a fad, but it's really taking like this way of eating, which is really a lifestyle. And we're able to apply, I don't like using the word biohacking because I feel like that's, I don't know, it's just kind of a turn off to me, but this is essentially like what it's doing, because as you continue on with this lifestyle, there's always going to be little tweaks and adjustments that you need to make. And it's so great that we have these tools to be able to use to do that.
Yes.
So were you doing keto and still following this lifestyle during your pregnancy?
I did a higher protein approach, but also high fat. And, during times of growth, especially is when we do need higher levels of protein. Our bodies are all made of protein except for fat and water. So, if you're growing another body, you need higher levels of protein. So protein recommendations for people who are pregnant, probably should be a little bit higher than where they're at. I needed higher levels as I was going through the pregnancy. And I also ended up doing, actually right before I got pregnant, for fertility, I did a traditional approach with ketogenic macros, a high fat, 85% fat. And I was doing that on carnivore. So like a ketogenic carnivore for my fertility. And I got pregnant right away. And the pregnancy was extremely smooth. I was very comfortable the entire time. I really felt like myself. I didn't have any real symptoms of being pregnant other than having a baby.
Other than a growing belly.
I didn't have any swelling. Even the doctor was always like, how are you not swollen? I just felt like I was myself, but pregnant. So that was really amazing. And, Luca's, absolutely thriving. So I had a very comfortable pregnancy. I feel really fortunate. No nausea, really no issues throughout it. So it went really well. And I did I still, kept my carbs, in, I guess, the low carb keto ranges. Like at the most, I think I probably went was 50 grams of carb. And that's what I did for me. I don't recommend that necessarily to anyone else. You have to check with your own doctor, your own care providers on what's right for you. But that's what worked really well for me. And, my body is very fat adapted. I didn't have any issues with, getting even close to gestational diabetes or anything like that. And low carb is now recommended in certain countries, thanks to the work that Lily Nichols has done, in terms of actually in the Czech Republic, her work influenced the policy here. So they recommend low carb diets to avoid gestational diabetes during pregnancy. So it really was a fantastic way of eating for me during the pregnancy.
Yeah, that's really great. I wish we could have, like, I'm glad that that's really popular there. That is so not the case here in the US, where, especially during pregnancy, where those high carbs and processed carbs are still so heavily pushed. And I see with clients that I have working with during pregnancy, and just like from friends, and what I see that a lot of women during pregnancy here still have a really hard time getting rid of those carbs. And that seems to be like the big craving. And it's probably because that work to become fat adapted before going into that phase of life hasn't been done. And so that just probably makes it even more challenging. But that could be a whole separate episode.
Right.
Okay. I am so curious about this topic because it's kind of new to me, and I'm still kind of exploring this. And we know that when you're doing a low carb or any kind of low carb, high fat, or low carb diet, we do hit plateaus, and there are tools that we can use. And so I really want to dive into this article with Leah, Leah, do you have anything else you want to chat about before we dive in?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm ready to dive in. It fits
in
really nicely.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about the protein sparing modified, is it FAST diet? Yeah. So I always only ever see the acronym, which is like PSMF. And I'm always like, is that like meant to be something else? Like
it's a mouthful.
It is. It's like one of those, I feel like I'm in that funny kind of era where I just don't quite get some of those acronyms the younger people say. And I'm like, am I missing something here? Anyway. Why don't we start with just, how about you explain to us what PSMF is, and maybe some of the benefits of why someone would want to choose this over, say, maybe keto or something like that.
I think it's an absolutely amazing tool for fat loss. That's really why it was first developed by a couple of doctors at Harvard. And, I've done a lot of episodes on my podcast talking about this because it is the Optimal Protein podcast. It's an important topic to cover. I like to talk a lot on the podcast about a couple of concepts. One of them is quality of weight loss. And so I focused a lot on some of the educational components around that. And we want to make sure that when we're looking for weight loss with keto, that we focus on fat loss and retaining lean mass or muscle. So that's really important. And another topic that I focus on is getting optimal protein. So this kind of combines those two because you're looking for quality weight loss, which is just fat loss. You don't want to waste muscle or just lose water. You want to, make sure that the progress that you're seeing is just coming from your body fat loss and retaining all the muscle that you have. And a protein sparing modified fast, one of the reasons that I really like it is as an alternative to water fasting, which has become very, very trendy in the last several years, especially. And I've seen more and more people go to water fasting for fat loss. And I don't think that it's a good tool for fat loss personally. I much prefer something like a protein sparing modified fast because it's going to be more protective of our muscle, because every day we have to get a certain amount of amino acids from our food sources, from exogenous sources. We have these 9 essential amino acids. And if we don't get them from our diet, as we would in a water fast, the body is going to have to utilize them from our own stores of muscle and break down muscle in order to get those essential amino acids. The other amino acids, the 11 others, we can make if we have those 9 from food. So when you do a protein sparing modified fast, you are protecting your muscle, you're protecting your body from breaking down any of that muscle by making sure that you get in protein every day. And you're also maximizing your body's ability to burn fat because you're not really taking in much energy. So you then go to your body stores, which is, what happens when people do keto. It's what happens when people do extended fasting. We really are able to tap into our stores of body fat. But those other methods are not always going to be as protective of our lean mass and our muscle mass as a protein sparing modified fast is.
Right. And so, like, getting into the nuts and bolts of it, are we restricting our calories during certain days and then eating more during other days? That's what I was kind of like getting the gist of. I've got an article here, which I'll link up into the show notes for everyone. It's a Healthline one. It kind of goes through, we'll talk through some concepts in it. But yeah, is that kind of like we're eating a certain amount of protein per day, carbs and fats?
Yeah. So it tends to range, there's different approaches to it from 500 to 1,000 calories a day, depending on, which kind of approach is being followed. I typically tend to favor one that is sort of closer to 800 to 1,000 calories, where you're making sure that you're getting your protein in for the day. It's mostly lean proteins that you're eating. Of those, 800 up to 1,000 calories, mostly lean protein. And then you can get some, fat in there, usually about 30 grams of fat in there. And then some people instead, they do, a little bit more carb on, the energy side, but you're really looking at your nutrition just in terms of the macros. You focus on the protein and you're minimizing the energy component as much as possible, so you can draw down on stored energy on your body. And so, the calories are lower than, like what's recommended for a standard weight loss diet, which for me, I like to recommend a 25% deficit in terms of total calories for fat loss. But if someone is doing a protein sparing modified fasting day, they can add in a couple of days a week into their regular sort of keto diet approach to accelerate the results without going to, in my opinion, the more extreme option, which is like not eating anything at all or not taking in any protein, just drinking water, in a water fasting situation. So that's kind of where the calories are. And most of what you're eating is lean protein. So, a lot of fish, a lot of like leaner poultry, leaner steak. Seafood is wonderful for protein sparing modified fast. You can get a lot of different variety in there from like shrimp and scallops and even, lobster, if that's something that you like. But fish like salmon is wonderful. It naturally is sort of on the leaner side. Most fish is, except for that, fattier fish, and then doing like leaner steak and just adding, mostly eating the fat that comes in those proteins.
And so what would a typical week look like? You'd have maybe a couple of these days, and then the rest of the week you would recommend eating your normal ketogenic diet. Is that how it kind of works?
Yeah. So if your goal was doing keto for fat loss, and you set in place like a 25% caloric deficit, then you could do those days, say 5 days out of the week. And then on 2 days of the week, you could do a protein sparing modified fast, or you could do 3 days, or you can either do them on alternative days. Some people like Dr. Brian Mole, who I just had on the podcast, they do them in a block. So 2-3 days together. And then the rest of the week is back to normal, diet, or, the diet that you were doing, that you had in place before that. So, it kind of depends where you're at and what's working for you as well. If some people are doing a caloric deficit at 25%, they're getting great results, then there isn't really a need to bring this in. But if someone is doing that 25% caloric deficit and they're not seeing any results, then they may want to add in 2 to 3 days a week of a protein sparing modified fast approach to kind of accelerate the fat loss a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And we all know, well, a lot of us know that one of the fastest ways to, for most clients or people to kind of like, stop a diet is hunger, because they get hungry and they want to, eat all the foods they were eating before. How does this kind of help you to not feel hunger on those lower days? Because, when people naturally hear, oh, lower calories, oh, I mustn't be, going to be feeling full on those days.
Yeah, so that's one of the most amazing things about this protocol that was, as I mentioned, first invented by a couple of doctors at Harvard. One of them was George Blackburn. And one of the reasons, that they found it to be so effective is that it manages hunger really well. And, with these groups of patients that they had sort of an average fat loss of 40 to 50 pounds, and the people were not experiencing much discomfort on the hunger level during that. And I think that this really fits into a lot of theories that we have regarding protein. Two scientists from your country, Leah, Dr. Robbenheimer and Simpson, came up with the protein leverage hypothesis, where they were studying insects, and they found that insects and animals will eat and overeat on energy calories until they get their protein needs met. So if you take that understanding and you just prioritize the protein, then it makes sense that our hunger, which is primarily driven by this need for protein, would be attenuated on this kind of diet where you prioritize what your body needs the most. Your body cannot get those 9 essential amino acids from the body, but it can get all kinds of energy if you have fat stored on your body. So, this was typically used and recommended for patients who are preparing for bariatric surgery. So a lot of the research that you see on it has been done, in very obese individuals who are preparing for surgery. That's where it's mostly been studied. But, people can sort of take, like I said, a couple of days from that and add it into their routine, as a temporary tool, maybe for 6 to 8 weeks to kind of move things along. But most people find that when they prioritize protein, they don't have that issue. And, one of the things that I like to do personally, if this is something that I'm doing, is to just eat lots of protein. I don't really put a limit on, the 800 to 1,000 calories. I just eat lean proteins until I'm full. And it really manages hunger well because of, the reasons that we mentioned with regards to protein leverage.
That sounds really interesting. Oh, did you have a question, Holly?
I do have a question, because I know that like the prioritizing protein has been a thing. And I find a lot of times with women, they have trouble eating enough protein. And so they're supplementing a lot with protein shakes or protein bars or something. Where does supplemental protein fit into this diet, if at all?
Yeah, I actually recommend that people use protein supplementation if it's the only way that they can meet their protein target for the day. So if you have no trouble reaching it, eating lots of, like poultry and steak and that kind of thing, then you don't need it. But like for me, I was doing 2 meals a day for a long time, but to optimize for muscle protein synthesis and growing my muscles, I needed to hit 3 or 4 meals a day. So for me to add in a third meal with my schedule, the only way I could do it was by adding in a protein shake. So I'm a big proponent of people adding in those shakes if it's the only way that they'll get, say, a third or fourth meal in. I just can't eat that much volume of food, of protein. I find it difficult, but in a shake, it's really easy. Like I do a cup of frozen berries with some unsweetened almond milk, and I use either a whey isolate or egg white protein in there. And it tastes great, and it fits into my schedule. It takes 5 minutes to make. And, it really is an easy way for me to make sure that I'm getting enough protein at that meal, because, and we talk about this on the podcast a lot, but in order to really optimize your protein intake, you don't want to just hit a target for the day, but you want to make sure at each meal that you're eating enough protein to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Your body will make new muscle and you won't break down too much muscle in the day. So it's important at each meal to get enough protein. And I think the protein shakes, because they are, 10, 11% leucine content, which is the amino acids that triggers muscle protein synthesis, it's really important to make sure to get enough at each meal. And I'm a big fan. If, the supplement is high quality, it has the right amount of leucine in it, it doesn't have a lot of fillers, there are some quality ones out there, and I will also avoid the ones that have a lot of artificial sweeteners in them. But whey protein isolate itself, I'm also a big fan of yogurt and of low fat dairy, because it's a high protein food and you also get a lot of great calcium from it as well.
All right, great. Thank you.
Some of those ones I saw, it reminded me, it kind of reminds me of some of the bodybuilding type diets back in the kind of, 80s, 90s, cottage cheese and
Yes.
Yogurt and things like that. So I guess there's some, resurgence of that, but this time they've kind of like taken it and really brought it to the next level. So they've kind of learnt from, just a piece of chicken and steamed broccoli is not going to be enough with a cottage cheese on side. So they've added some more to this diet now.
Right.
Yeah. So speaking of that though, Healthline decided to give it a 1.25 out of 5 for their review on whether it's effective or not. And really though, when I was looking through the article, there wasn't really much reasons why it was given such a low rating, apart from it may increase the risk of nutritional deficiencies, but it doesn't actually say what deficiencies we're talking about here. I assume it's back to this rating is probably the same as what they would give keto, since you're excluding grains and those types of things. And then it also said it may cause mild side effects. What, happiness and joy? I'm not sure. And that it's not advisable for some people. So they were kind of saying like anyone that has any disordered type eating, people that have had issues with calorie counting and things like that in the past, is probably not advisable for people. What do you think about some of those myths? And is there any reason when you wouldn't suggest this PSMF to anybody?
Yeah, I love the article. I think, they pointed out some of the positive research on it, and I think that's really important. They seem to state about 3 studies. One of them, they say, found in 127 people that protein sparing modified fast was more effective than a conventional low calorie diet for short-term weight loss. But they do mention a lot that the weight regain, like in one study, dieters had more than 50% of the weight loss. They regained it within 2 to 3 years. And this is something really fascinating. If you look at the origins of the diet, the doctors who first started using it, they realized that at the end of a protein sparing modified fast, the thing that dieters should do is transition to a low carb, high fat diet or a ketogenic diet. But at the time, they believed that this was a dangerous diet to do, that it was very unhealthy. And so they actually completely left this field of work and totally abandoned all the work that they had done, because they felt that it wouldn't be ethical to recommend keto to people. So if you are already doing a ketogenic diet, this is something I think that fits in really well into that. And, a lot of the research, like I said, it's been done, for obese individuals who are doing it under medical supervision. And I think that, a lot of the research points to people who have more than 40 pounds to lose total. That's a situation where they would maybe want to do like a medically supervised, protein sparing modified fast where they're doing it every day. That's why, for people who are maybe not in that situation or have less weight to lose, then, it's maybe adding it in a couple days a week for a short-term period of 6 to 8 weeks into your ketogenic diet. I think, if someone was underweight, had any eating issues in the past, it may not necessarily be for them. As you said, I always, whenever I do posts about it, or I talk about it on the podcast, I make sure, to say, if you don't have weight to lose, like, do not do a protein sparing modified fast, because you have to have body fat, you have to have stored energy on your body to be able to do this kind of protocol. And that's the only reason you should be doing it, is for quality weight loss or fat loss and body recomposition. I would not do it to gain muscle. It's not going to help with that at all, or for any other situation. It's really, what's interesting about it is that people doing protein sparing modified fast, they do get into ketosis, so there could be situations, maybe, I'm not sure, where someone would do it just for ketosis, but, why not just eat, a traditional ketogenic diet if that would be the case. But yeah, the article is interesting. And if you look at the research, there's a lot of studies showing that it is a safe diet to do for most people, that it is, for healthy individuals, it's something that is, safe, and it's very effective. And at the end of the day, right now, I think what we need more than anything is effective tools that will help people. And, when I first started talking about keto, it was difficult to talk about it. People were very afraid of even the word keto. Ketosis was being conflated all the time with ketoacidosis, which has nothing to do with, for the most part. I think protein sparing modified fast, for me, the reason I love it is I think it is a much safer alternative to water fasting, which has become very popular in the last few years. And, if someone is going to forego all food and just have water in order to lose weight, I'd really prefer that they would, be sure to do a protein sparing modified fast to preserve their lean muscle instead.
Yeah. And you would recommend it to women?
I think both men and women who are healthy individuals who have, a lot of body fat that they want to lose, I think adding in 2 to 3 days a week would probably, be something effective. At the end of the day, you have to check, with your doctor if it is appropriate for you, in terms of your hormone levels. Like if you, are perfectly healthy and don't have any hormonal issues, if you don't have any issues that a doctor might think would be contraindicated with doing this, it's really important to always check with your, care provider and make sure that it's something that they think makes sense for you too. But you can do your own research, do your own due diligence, look up the studies, don't just rely maybe on this Healthline article, but look up the studies mentioned in it. And that will make you more prepared when you talk to your doctor and say, like, look, this is what I've looked into. These are the benefits, what do you think? And that's a conversation to always have with your doctor.
It's a very well-rounded answer there. The reason why I asked if you thought about it for women was because it's not listed in the article in diets that don't work for women that Holly is going to talk about next.
I know this is actually a perfect tie-in because we see articles like this one that I'm going to talk about all the time. And this is titled Diets That Don't Work for Women. And it basically just points out that yes, men and women are different. And one of the ways in which we are different is in the way we store fat and have fat on our body, and saying that women have more fat than men. And that is just a fact of life here. But it's saying that women have 4 times as much essential fat than men, and that our stored fat is beneficial to our health. But it says it's calling out 3 particular diets here that are unsafe for women. And 1 and 2 is the keto diet and intermittent fasting. I don't even know what a GM diet is. It sounds weird. So I'm just going to skip that one and we'll stay on topic with the keto and intermittent fasting. But one thing it says, just we'll pick on keto here first, is it says it can cause shock to a women's bodies. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, this article started off with a quote from Grey's Anatomy, so that made me really skeptical at first. I think that there are a lot of misunderstandings out there, especially about keto. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people think that it is like this very extreme diet. And yet, we know that carbohydrates and fats, you're both just really getting sources of carbon. Like lipid fats are hydrocarbons, carbohydrates are, carbohydrates. So, when people say that you need carbs and you can't, survive with them at a limited or restricted amount, it doesn't really make sense to me biochemically. I'm not sure why they think that, a ketogenic diet is going to do more harm than good. Because they're talking about things like, it makes women lose their muscle mass and experience all kind of issues, like you said, going into shock. I'm not sure why that would happen, because keto itself is actually a pretty high energy diet. You're getting a lot of energy from healthy fats. And I think a lot of times when we see criticism of keto in general and in articles like this, it really comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what keto is. I think a lot of people don't understand it, but there's also like lots of different versions of keto that people have. I tend to look at keto as a whole foods, diet where you are really emphasizing healthy, whole foods and healthy sources of fats, and even healthy carbs, low glycemic carbs, and prioritizing protein, and you're minimizing your intake of sugar, of highly processed foods, that's going to be beneficial for most individuals. And that's something I think that most people would agree. But when there's this fundamental misunderstanding of what keto is, I think that causes a lot of the, negativity that we see out there in the press about it, especially.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think there is still this mindset that keto is just eating sticks of butter and pounds of bacon. And while those two food items do fit into the overall diet, that's not all it is. Like, it really does just prioritize nutrient dense foods. And as you mentioned, there are a plethora of varieties of keto, but the healthiest version of keto is one that does prioritize getting a wide variety of foods that are whole foods. And I don't know how we move away from this stigma, because it's been forever now. And the other soundbite that people say all the time is, oh, it's for epilepsy. It's not a diet for regular people. And it's like, can we just move away from that? So obviously it's good for brain health. So why wouldn't it have other benefits as well, especially with so many success stories coming out with people reversing chronic diseases and illnesses and stuff. So I would just like to get past that.
It almost just comes down to the terminology. If we called it like a healthy whole foods diet that emphasizes healthy fats and carbs and minimizes and eliminates sugar and processed carbs, like I think everyone would agree that sounds great.
Yeah.
It's like a branding or a terminology issue. And I wish we could move past it as well, so that, more people could, have access to the benefits potentially of doing this kind of healthy whole food diet.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a branding thing. The one thing that it does talk about in this article, and since we touched on it, you touched on it with your story about how this way of eating was really helpful for you and your fertility. This article says a keto diet does more harm than good to the majority of women, especially if they have underlying medical conditions like PCOS, irregular menses, or infertility. And we know that is incorrect. Do you want to touch on that just a little bit?
Those are some pretty alarming claims. I think especially because so many people specifically come to keto for issues like PCOS, and PCOS especially is related to regulating one of the most important hormones in our body, which is insulin, and lowering levels of insulin in the body. And, keto diet is great for that, because you are not eating a lot of high glycemic carbs. You're really, eating a lot of healthy proteins and healthy fats. So you bring those insulin levels down, and it can help a lot with fertility issues that people have. If anyone were to come to me and say, I'm struggling to get pregnant, what should I do? The first thing I would say is do a ketogenic carnivore diet, because you're going to be really emphasizing all the most nutrient dense foods. Like, I was just eating tons of egg yolks, tons of beef and burgers, and I added in some liver in there as well. Like, just all the most nutrient dense foods that I could possibly eat, and making sure to get lots of energy as well. And, that to me really helped and has been shown in research to help, because it does lower insulin so much. So I think the claim that the article is making that it would be harmful in terms of fertility and PCOS is really off base.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, like, I know Leah and I, just clients that we've worked with and in those categories, have seen so much success, and there's countless research of a ketogenic diet being beneficial to reversing many of those conditions. So that just really doesn't have a leg to stand on. But it's unfortunate that these are articles that come out, and like I think Leah mentioned before we started recording, particularly this source, this Times of India. If you were just to do a search on the internet, articles from this website come up all the time. Like, it's one of our most popular search engine results. And so it's important that we talk about things like this, because this is what people are finding when they do a search on the internet. So I'm so glad you're here to set the record straight. wanted to ask you, hold on, what was it? I had it right there on the tip of my tongue. I lost it. Leah, do you have anything you want to add from this article before we kind of like wrap it up here?
No, not really. I am like, obviously I'm in agreement that, anything that's coming from Times of India, I think we should, read with a fine tooth. And because there's nothing in this article that actually backs up any of the statements that they've made here either. So at least in the Healthline article that we read before, they're linking to studies. So,
yes,
there's some credibility there, but these Times of India ones, to make those statements, like you said, they're just bold statements with no scientific backing behind that.
There is a disclaimer. Views expressed above are the author's own.
Yeah. There you go.
It seems like, they're maybe using just the keto word in order to get, hits. I have search alerts for like keto study and that kind of thing. And they do pop up all the time. And it seems like it's really just to get those, those clicks. And unfortunately, they may not always be doing the research that needs to go into it. And it's unfortunate that it's such a negative stance on it too.
Yeah. So if someone wants to learn more, do you work with people? Do you have resources for people, or where can we direct our audience to go to learn more?
Yeah, you can check out my website, Ketogenic Girl, for more on the Tone device. All of my meal plans and programs are there. I always recommend that people listen to the podcast because I have such wonderful guests and experts that come on there to share their expertise with us. And, it's the education component I think is so important for, for people to have success with this way of life, is understanding like why it works, why they should prioritize protein, why it's important to limit the intake of certain foods and emphasize others. And it's so important just to get that education. So the podcast is the best place I can send anyone. And that's the Optimal Protein Podcast, which is formerly Fast Keto. And you can follow me. I'm pretty active on social media. I have a Facebook group for the podcast, which has a wonderful community in there. And I'm pretty active on Instagram and Facebook and all different social media platforms at Ketogenic Girl.
All right, great. We will be sure to link all those up in the show notes so our audience can find you easily. Thank you so much. I think this has been a really eye-opening conversation, and anyone who may be in a plateau or just looking to take their health or nutrition to that next level, this sounds like a really good next step for them. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
My pleasure. It was an honor to be back here on your wonderful program. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, we're excited to have you back on again. And I just wanted to ask one question. Is there going to be another new book coming out soon, or what's in the pipeline?
I'm working on a new book on the protein side, with sort of new meal plans for people to do, sort of an optimal protein keto diet. So that is something that I'm working on, and hopefully it'll be out in the next year or so.
That sounds exciting. We'll have to have you back on when that book comes out then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, that's the end of today's episode. Our theme music is created by Andrew Bowden and production services are by Kevin Kennedy Spain of Disc of Light Media. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great week.